We were at a restaurant. Supposedly for me. My name was on the reservation. But when the waiter brought the cake, it said, "To the daughter who wasn't ours." Everyone laughed, like it was a joke. Except me. I smiled, cut the cake, and served it to them myself. That's when my daughter passed me a folded envelope, and said, "You don't have to smile through this anymore." The room had just enough candlelight to make everything look softer than it was. My sister's husband raised his glass like he was offering a toast, but all he said was, "She really did turn out okay, considering." The rest of the table chuckled like they all understood the punchline. I kept pouring water into my mother's glass as if I hadn't heard it. The thing about humiliation in public is, it doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers through fake smiles and shared glances. I'd learned a long time ago how to swallow it without choking. The table was long. Not formal banquet long, but long enough to make me feel like I was seated in another time zone. I was at the very end, right by the swinging kitchen doors, where the waitstaff brushed past without a second glance. When we first arrived, my niece had waved me over with one hand while texting with the other. "Over here, Aunt. Yeah, here." I sat down where they told me, took the menu nobody offered, and smiled when my order was wrong. No dressing, iceberg instead of romaine. It didn't matter. I wasn't hungry anymore. They kept calling it my night, but every story they told at that table started with someone else's name. They laughed about vacations I wasn't invited to, birthdays I hadn't known happened, inside jokes I'd never been let in on. At one point, my younger brother said, "Remember when we tried to convince her she was adopted?" He looked straight at me. "Guess the joke stuck, huh?" The laughter was louder that time. Even my mother smirked, as if it were all harmless fun. I reached for the salt and let the sting settle into my chest like something familiar. The cake came out with sparklers and fanfare, as if they hadn't just stripped me bare in front of people who claimed to love me. It was pink, store-bought, lopsided on one side. The writing was done in shaky white frosting, clearly rushed, like an afterthought. "To the daughter who wasn't ours." I stared at it for a moment, unsure if I'd read it wrong. But the waiter read it aloud like it was part of the celebration, and the table erupted. My father wiped a tear, laughing. "You've got to admit, that's a good one." I didn't flinch. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I didn't want to give them the gift of a reaction. I stood, picked up the cake knife, and began cutting neat, even slices. I served my sister first. Then my mother. Then each person down the line, smiling like I was in on the joke. I saved the last slice for myself, and that's when my daughter slipped the envelope onto my lap. She didn't say much. Just that one sentence. "You don't have to smile through this anymore." And for the first time all night, my hands trembled. I didn't open it right away. I tucked it beneath my napkin, heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear my brother's next joke about my emotional theatrics as a teen. I remember nodding along to something my aunt was saying about gluten-free desserts. I remember my fork scraping against the porcelain plate like it was digging a tunnel. But mostly, I remember my daughter's eyes. They were steady, calm, braver than I had ever been at her age. I wondered what she knew. Or worse, what she'd seen that I hadn't meant for her to. After dessert, they began discussing summer plans. A family reunion I hadn't heard of. Beach houses being rented, flights being booked. My name was never brought up. My mother asked if someone could bring her sweater from the car. I offered, but she asked my sister instead. I wasn't surprised. I stopped being surprised years ago. What replaced surprise was a kind of quiet cataloging of every moment I was erased in real time. And now that catalog had a new entry, the envelope on my lap, warming in my hand like it carried heat. Just as I was about to excuse myself to the restroom, my father stood up and tapped his glass with a spoon. Everyone hushed. "I just want to say," he announced, "not every child ends up where they're supposed to. But sometimes, life puts people in our paths to teach us patience." He looked at me as if he were giving me a compliment. "And Lord knows, she's been patient." More laughter. I watched my daughter shift in her seat. Her lips pressed tight. My grip on the envelope tightened too. When we finally left, the restaurant doors felt heavier than when we'd come in. My daughter walked beside me silently. In the car, I placed the envelope on the dashboard. Neither of us spoke until we reached home. The streetlight outside our house flickered as if it knew something was about to happen. I reached for the envelope with one hand and unlocked the front door with the other. My daughter stopped me. "Wait till you're inside," she said. "Just in case." And I should have listened. But I didn't. I opened it right there under the street lamp. A single sheet. Typed. With a seal on the top corner. My breath caught before I even read the first line. Because I recognized the logo. Not from any medical facility, but from a lawyer's office. One I hadn't visited in nearly 20 years. The name in the corner, Margaret Haynes, wasn't mine. But the birth date below it. It was. And just beneath that, in bold, custodial transfer record. The porch light flickered. The envelope slipped from my hand. I bent to pick it up, and another paper fell out, one I hadn't seen tucked behind the first. A handwritten note. My daughter's writing. Just 4 words. "I thought you knew." And that's when the front door creaked open, on its own. I was 8 when I first realized there was something different about the way I fit into my family, and it had nothing to do with personality. It was subtle at first. The way my mother would triple-check everyone's lunchboxes but forget mine until we were halfway out the door. The way my brothers would get scolded for tracking mud into the house while I was handed a mop before they even finished laughing. It wasn't cruelty. Not exactly. Just a constant sense of being slightly misplaced, like a book someone had shelved in the wrong section and decided to leave there. When I was 12, I overheard one of my aunts whisper to another, "She's lucky they kept her, all things considered." I had been walking by with a plate of snacks, and they froze when they saw me, smiling too hard. I remember wondering what "kept" meant. I wasn't a stray cat. Or maybe I was. Over the years, that feeling of being barely tethered to the people around me hardened into habit. I became useful. Reliable. I didn't argue. I offered help before being asked. I cleaned, cooked, stayed out of fights, and gave more than I had. Because somewhere deep inside, I believed I was on borrowed time. Birthdays came and went with dollar store candles and combined celebrations. "It's easier this way," my mother would say. I never got a party of my own. Once, I asked if I could invite a few friends over. She looked at me like I'd asked to rent a yacht. "You want to invite strangers into our house?" So I dropped it. My sister, on the other hand, had sleepovers, streamers, themed cakes. I helped decorate for hers. I still remember blowing up balloons and writing her name on the banner, knowing no one would ever do the same for me. When I graduated high school, I wasn't asked what I wanted to study. My father handed me a list of practical options: nursing, clerical work, secretarial school. "Nothing with art or stories or fantasy," he said. "We need real-world contributions." I chose the quietest option on the list and didn't complain. At the time, I thought that's what loyalty looked like. Sacrificing your own dreams to earn a seat at a table that never really had a place set for you. My daughter was born when I was 23. The moment they placed her in my arms, something cracked wide open. She looked at me like I was the whole world, not just a placeholder in someone else's story. I promised myself she would never feel like I did. Never question her place. Never wonder if she was a burden. I raised her to be outspoken, curious, and unapologetically herself. And when my family mocked her for being too sensitive, I bit my tongue for her sake. I didn't want her to grow up feeling like her roots were planted in sand. I wanted to be solid for her, even if I had to disappear to do it. My silence wasn't weakness. It was survival. There's a difference between being quiet and being invisible. I knew everything. Every time my mother corrected me in front of guests. Every time my siblings used me as a punchline. Every time a family photo was taken and I was asked to stand slightly to the side to make room for someone else. I saw it all. I just didn't say it. Because I thought maybe, just maybe, love was something you could earn with enough patience. There were moments when the mask slipped. Once, after a family dinner where I spent hours in the kitchen while everyone else laughed in the living room, I caught my reflection in the dark window. I looked like the help. Not a guest. Not a daughter. Not a sister. Just a pair of tired hands holding a tray. Another time, when I was sick with the flu, I called my mother to ask if she could bring soup. She said she was too busy helping my brother's wife decorate her nursery. My daughter was the one who made me tea and sat at the edge of my bed reading out loud until I fell asleep. Years passed like this. Not dramatic. Just quietly exhausting. I built a life out of scraps. A smile that felt like armor. A home where my daughter could be loved without conditions. But there were signs. Little ones. Things I ignored because the truth was too heavy to carry. One day, while cleaning out an old box in my parents' attic, I found a hospital bracelet that didn't have my name. The birth date matched mine, but the mother's name was blank. I showed it to my mother, and she said, "Oh, hospitals made mistakes all the time back then," and quickly changed the subject. I wanted to believe her. So I did. Then came the letter. Not the one in the envelope from the restaurant. A different one. From years ago. Tucked inside a birthday card my daughter made for me when she was 10. "You're the best mom in the world," she wrote. "Even if Grandma says we're not really like the others." I didn't confront anyone. I didn't ask questions. I kissed her forehead and told her that being different didn't make us less. But that night, I cried into a pillow so quietly, even the house didn't hear. I think part of me always knew. That I didn't come from the same place they did. That I was grafted onto a family tree I didn't grow from. But I also believed that roots could form with enough time, enough love. That maybe being chosen, even in a twisted, accidental way, meant something. And I clung to that belief like it was the last life raft in a sea of silence. Until the envelope arrived. Until my daughter's words cracked through everything I'd buried. And the seal on that paper told me this wasn't just a feeling. It was fact. I wasn't one of them. I never had been. And just when I thought I was ready to face what came next, I turned on the hallway light, and saw that my mother was standing inside my house, holding something in her hand. She stood in my hallway like she belonged there. Like she hadn't just sat through an entire dinner celebrating my erasure. Her coat was still buttoned, her lips pressed tight, and her eyes didn't move from mine. In her hand was a small envelope, white, worn, edges curled from being touched too many times. For a moment, neither of us spoke. My daughter stayed behind me, one hand gently on my back, waiting. I swallowed the rising heat in my chest and asked quietly, "Why are you here?" My mother looked at me the way she always did, like I was the one overreacting. "I figured you'd open it," she said, nodding toward the envelope in my hand. Her voice was soft, but there was a tremor beneath it. Not guilt. Something else. A tension I hadn't heard before. "I thought maybe you'd be confused. I didn't want you jumping to conclusions." She stepped forward like this was some minor misunderstanding, like I'd misread a card or misheard a story. But the weight of the truth in my hand told me otherwise. I didn't respond. I didn't invite her in. She walked past me anyway. My daughter stayed near the door, arms crossed, eyes blazing with a protectiveness I hadn't expected to need tonight. My mother sat on the edge of my couch like she was waiting for tea. I stayed standing. "So it's true?" I asked. My voice didn't shake. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because the pain had already passed into something colder. She sighed, like this conversation was a burden. "You were left outside the house. Just a baby. There was a note, no name. We thought your mother would come back, but she never did." I wanted to scream, but what came out was a whisper. "And you never told me." She looked up, frowning. "We gave you a home. We fed you, clothed you. You had more than most girls like you. Like me." The words landed sharp, and I watched as my daughter stiffened. I felt her hurt mixing with mine. "I was never yours," I said. "But you let me believe I was. Until it was convenient to make me a joke." My mother didn't argue. She didn't deny it. She just looked tired. "It wasn't about hurting you. It was just easier that way." I turned away before she could see my face crack. Because the part that broke me wasn't the truth itself. It was how little she cared that I'd lived my entire life trying to earn a place I was never truly given. I thought about every school award I'd brought home, every dish I cooked, every time I cleaned quietly in the background while they toasted someone else. I thought about the birthdays I spent alone, the holidays I wasn't invited to, the family photos where I was always one step too far to the left. "I have something else," she said, holding up the old envelope. "This was with you. I never opened it. Maybe it'll mean more to you now." I didn't take it. I stared at it like it might burn my hands. "Why now?" I asked. "Because you're caught." Her face hardened. "Because you're making a scene. We raised you. Be grateful." My daughter stepped forward then, snatched the envelope from her hand, and said without a single tremor, she was never the one who should be grateful. It was my daughter who opened the envelope at the kitchen table. My mother sat stiffly on the couch, suddenly quiet. Inside was a single note, written in rushed handwriting. The ink faded. It read, "Please take care of her. I have no choice. Her name is Margaret. She deserves more than I can give." No last name. No contact. No promise to return. Just a line from someone who had disappeared. I didn't cry. I didn't fall apart. I just sat down slowly and let the reality settle into my bones. My name wasn't even mine. Margaret. I whispered it once, twice. It didn't sound like me. It felt like trying on a coat that didn't fit anymore. But somewhere deep inside, it also unlocked something. A sense of distance. Like I'd been holding my breath my entire life, and now I finally had permission to let go. My mother stood and moved toward the door. "Do what you want with it," she said. "But don't forget, we took you in when no one else did." I didn't reply. I didn't owe her any words. The door closed behind her with a final click. For a long time, the three of us, me, my daughter, and the silence, just sat there. Then she said, "You've always been more than they deserved." I reached across the table, took her hand, and squeezed it. "So have you." We didn't talk about it anymore that night. Instead, we made tea. We laughed over something on TV. We let the truth breathe between us without demanding space. And when I finally went to bed, I placed the letter in my drawer, not as a keepsake, but as proof that I hadn't imagined any of it. The next day, I woke to a message from my sister. A group chat photo had been shared. It was from the dinner. I was cropped out. The caption read, "Just family things." Underneath, a comment from my brother, "Margaret probably took the picture." I stared at it for a while, then deleted the entire thread. My daughter walked in, saw my face, and asked, "Do you want me to say something?" I shook my head. "No. Let them speak." I've said enough by walking away. But later that week, I found something else. In the mail. No return address. A thick yellow envelope, sealed tight. Inside was a copy of the original deed to my childhood home. And a letter. Not from my mother, but from my father's lawyer. One line stood out among the rest. In the event that Margaret Haynes is located and identified, ownership rights revert to her as per amended clause. It was dated 7 months ago, just after his last hospitalization. I sat back in my chair, heart thudding in my chest, because what I'd been denied my whole life wasn't just affection or truth. It was something else. Something tangible. And now it was mine. Whether they liked it or not. I didn't tell anyone when I went to see the house. I just took the keys, slipped them into my pocket, and drove out early one morning before the sun had warmed the streets. The neighborhood looked smaller than I remembered, the trees older, the sidewalk cracked in the same places it always had been. Nothing had changed, not even the rusted mailbox that leaned slightly to one side. The house stood just as it had my entire childhood. 2 stories of dull beige paint and memories that never quite made room for me. But this time, I didn't approach it like a visitor. I used my key. The door creaked the same way. The air still held that faint scent of lemon cleaner and old curtains. I walked room to room without a single person asking what I was doing. The living room, where I'd always sat on the floor. The dining room, where I'd served meals I hadn't been invited to enjoy. My old bedroom, bare now, still had faint scuff marks where my bed used to be. I opened the closet and found a single shoebox tucked in the corner, like a memory someone tried to forget. Inside were faded photographs, none of which I was in. But there was a page torn from a children's book with my name written on it in clumsy crayon. Not Margaret. Just the name they gave me. The one they used when it suited them. I didn't cry. I wasn't here for closure. I was here for clarity. I walked through every inch of that house with new eyes. And when I reached the kitchen, I pulled the cake napkin from my coat pocket and laid it on the counter. The one from the dinner. The one that held the crumbs of my final humiliation. I placed it down gently, not with anger, but like setting down the last piece of something that no longer belonged to me. Then I walked out, locked the door behind me, and left the key in the mailbox. That night, my sister called. I let it ring. Then my brother. Then a cousin I hadn't heard from in 3 years. All asking the same thing in different ways. Was it true? Was the house mine? Was I going to keep it? I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I wasn't looking for their panic, their guilt, or their sudden interest. I had nothing left to explain. They had spoken loudest when they said nothing at all. My daughter and I spent the next weekend repainting the small guest room in our home. We filled it with light, soft rugs, plants that leaned toward the sun. She called it our beginning room. A place where things start over, not get hidden away. I found a new job at a quiet bookstore where people whispered stories to each other and no one needed proof of who you were to be treated with kindness. I kept the name they gave me. Not because I owed them anything, but because I had lived that name into something real, something mine. Margaret belonged to a past I didn't choose. The other name belonged to me. Weeks passed. Then months. The family tried again. They sent messages about Christmas, about not letting old things ruin the present. But I'd lived long enough as their present, gift-wrapped in silence and obligation. I didn't need their invitations. My daughter and I made our own holidays. We made cookies that didn't need to impress anyone, told jokes that didn't punch downward, and danced in our kitchen with music only we liked. Peace doesn't come in one moment. It comes slowly. In the way you stop waiting for an apology. In the way you stop rehearsing what you'd say if they finally listened. One morning, a letter came. Handwritten. Uneven. From my father. He'd passed months earlier, but the letter had been filed with the lawyer's office and delayed. It read like someone trying to speak through fog. He said he knew. That he'd always known. That he hadn't stopped it because it was easier to let my mother lead. He apologized, in his own weak way, for the way I was treated. For letting a little girl believe she was lucky just to be tolerated. And at the end, he wrote, "You were never theirs. You were always more." That didn't fix anything. But it did help one thing. It reminded me that even if no one said it out loud while I was growing up, someone had seen me. Even if he'd stayed silent. Even if it came too late. I tucked that letter into a drawer with the rest of the past and left it there. Sometimes we think we need big endings. Closure in the form of apologies shouted across rooms or tears in public. But real justice is quiet. It's a life built on your own terms. A name you keep because you filled it with your own story. A daughter who looks at you and sees everything they didn't. I never went back to that restaurant. Never sat at that table again. I heard they still meet up for birthdays. That they still post group photos. I don't check anymore. I'm not in them. And that's the most honest thing they've ever done. They said I didn't belong. And I finally agreed. Because I was never one of them. I was always just me. And that was enough. And when my daughter asked me what I wanted to do with the deed, I smiled and said, nothing. Let it sit empty. Let the house echo with the silence it gave me for years. Sometimes, the best revenge is letting people live with exactly what they built. I wasn't invited back. But I never needed to be.